So could you describe how you first started working with computer art?
Well, it was something that was always around me. I mean, the pictures on my wall of the family home when I was a child, and certainly at my grandmother's home, there was always works of my father's around. And so naturally, there was the inclination to try and kind of copy my dad and things like that. And I'm told as soon as we had a family home computer, even when I was only kind of 4 or 5, that I was already sort of pressing characters and typing letters on the screen to try and make pictures. And then, back in the early 80s, there was software around such as Turtle, which is a programming language that allows you to draw images and things. And so that was the kind of thing that we were taught in schools by that age.
Was it sort of art that inspired you, or was it the computer and how it works, and the technology behind that?
Definitely both. I mean, I am an engineer, I am a mathematician. My mother was a maths lecturer, and so in fact in high school the subjects that I was strongest at were maths and economics and physics. But even from an early age, I was always getting my hands dirty and playing with paint and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I think I was just very lucky to have both sort of left and right brains aspects, although certain things such as English I was never good at.
Mm-hmm. And were there any artists or sort of movements in particular that inspired you?
Again, obviously my father was a huge influence. Going to see his early work, digital pictures in London, and then seeing subsequently the adverts on television and being able to point to it and say my dad did that was a huge influence. But I will be honest, William Latham is contemporary of my father's. His work, certainly when I was in my early teens, I don't know, it definitely inspired me and was an influence.
Mm. And we talked a bit about nature and the juxtaposition with technology earlier when we were in the exhibition. And obviously with your work with the flowers, it's kind of an interesting combination, combining something so modern and technical with something so natural and kind of old as time in a way. How do you think that those two things sit together, and what's your ideas behind that project as well?
I think as a recipe it works very well. However, it was an accident that I stumbled upon it. The first flowers piece I did, which was more of a tree than a flower, was something that I did as an exercise in computer programming. And the Design Museum picked it up and said, oh, we'd really like if we could project that. I wasn't expecting it particularly. The piece was a runaway hit, and when they showed it in the museum, people consistently said it was their favourite thing in the show. And I realised at that moment, to my surprise, that it was a way that people could really understand computer programs when they saw them sort of running as these processes in a natural way. Mm-hmm. And from that moment on, I actually, personally, they've sat very well together. I now see creating flowers and creating ever more realistic or super real flowers is a great way of demonstrating computer technology to people who don't know anything about computers.
Mm-hmm. And I thought they're very beautiful, but there's also a kind of sadness, and they're quite mesmerising. And it's kind of something maybe along the lines of preserving these flowers and kind of making them live forever, like you would keeping something in a museum. And then there's also something very modern and kind of flashy. There's such bright colours, and they're so beautiful with the kind of patterns, and it's something also very artificial. Where do you think they sit for you? Is it something very futuristic and modern, or is it something that you're taking and looking back in time and kind of...
You hit the nail on the head. My aim is to make flowers that look real, but that obviously can't possibly be real. So for example, with the Victoria and Albert Museum commission, I was very keen to make the petals deliberately dirty, to deliberately put water stain on them and things like that, so that they would literally look how a real petal would look if you photographed it. But then you can see the actual pattern on the petal is not merely a natural gradient of colours, but in fact is obviously a bit of designed material from a William Morris wallpaper, for example. And so very much my aim is to at the same time as looking real, also being kind of otherworldly and just pointing out that this is something that's this kind of almost supernatural.
And I wanted to talk about your piece, Reverse Archaeology, as well, because that's again something that kind of feels there's this aged nature of the architecture in there, but then you're doing something very modern and seeing it on a screen. Was that a similar kind of process, like thought process behind that?
It's offhand I couldn't tell you, remember where the initial spark for that piece came from, but I do know that before my accident and my disability, I was a big fan of games like SimCity and things, and I did write Reverse Archaeology partly selfishly because I thought it would be really great if I could make a simple experience that allowed me to create a city like you can in SimCity and things, but without having all the complex tasks and requiring hours of play. And so it was very personal to me, and I did like the idea of because the buildings are generative and you'd never see the same building twice. It really is this sense of the discovery that you find with archaeology, but turning that around and saying, well, this could be the future, this could be something that isn't real.
And when you go through the exhibition, that's something you can really participate in in the audience. And is that important to you to have a kind of interactive element of your work as well? Definitely.
Although most of the show is not around interactive work, probably most of my practice is interactive work, and most of my paid design work is in the field of interactivity. And I'm really keen on anything I do to create an experience which allows the user empowers the user to do something that they couldn't already do. For example, if they can't draw, then can we make an interactive experience that allows them to create things as beautiful as drawings without needing the precision and dexterity of being able to hold a pencil.
Yeah. And we were talking earlier as well about the title of the exhibition, Art That Makes Itself. And is that, like, how do you see that relationship as well? Do you see the programme as kind of you as the maker, or do you see it the other way around as the kind of computer making something for you in a way?
I see it as the computer making something for everyone. What I find personally beautiful about this kind of work is knowing that once you start that computer program, it could run for the rest of history, rest of mankind, and you'd never see the same sort of pattern twice, you'd never see the same exact flower twice, and I think that creates a beautiful just notion of, in a sense, it's something that we can offer art that hasn't been so much possible until now. And certainly there have always been artworks that are based, say for example, kinetic artworks, which again can be designed so that they would never repeat their motion and things like that. But I think it's a whole new kind of field or movement that we're creating now with computers.
Maybe you could describe the project Synesthesia, and that was with Nick Knight.
That's right.
How did that come about?
Okay, that was a project we created for Show Studio, which is an experimental platform that Nick Knight runs. He very much wanted to open up the fashion world and fashion advertising world to the public and allow the public to see what goes on behind the camera lens and things like that, and even go as far as to allow the public to interact with that process. And as part of that, Nick photographed a set of clothes for Balenciaga, it's a major brand, which were incredibly intricate. And I think really just off the back of him doing that, he became aware, of the condition known as synesthesia. And these couture garments were so fragile and intricate, he wanted to, he thought this must do something strange to somebody with synesthesia. And he was very keen on, the type of synesthesia that involves mixing audio and visual signals. And by coincidence, a friend of ours, also named Nick Ryan, he's a musician and also suffers from he wouldn't say suffers, but has the condition synesthesia. So when he heard this, Nick Knight sort of said, we've got to do something together. So we all kind of came into the fashion, to the photography studio, and spent an afternoon looking at these beautiful garments. And Nick Ryan went away and composed, the sort of experience it gave him of these garments. And then we tried to make an interactive experience which allowed the user to sort of get that sense as they moved around the garment and felt the garment, the kind of sounds that occurred to Nick.
You also found quite a good way of making your work commercial, because you're designing and you also have your work is out there and people are seeing it. But how much artistic sort of control do you have over that? And do you have a certain vision, or are you very much working together and collaborating?
It differs from client to client. I would say I've been very lucky in that it was very early on in my career that I won, for example, the Designer of the Year award. And as a result, I think people don't come to me thinking, all right, we'll get him to do exactly what we want. It wouldn't be a very good way of getting something done. Instead, people are more likely to come to me and say, what do you think? Have a think about this, and what do you think you could create that has that magic for our brand? And it's always turned out very well.
And what about sort of scale? Do you ever have an opportunity to work on a really large scale, or is it often on a screen, or is it a sort of combination of different things?
Combination of different things. I've done projection works up to about 40 feet high, so really very large, sort of cinema-sized. Been very lucky. I did a huge piece of the Victorian Albert Museum, right in their atrium, which was about probably 2.5 stories high. So it goes from that size all the way down to screens. However, fortunately, as the technology is, it gets cheaper and cheaper every year. And just this week, just today, in fact, we've been pricing up a project. And you can get a 60-inch screen now, commercial grade screen, for $1,400, which is near enough £1,000. So that's not expensive, and that's a huge screen. This is an interactive piece involving a camera, and you can basically get the entire person's body at life size onto a screen that big. Yeah, pretty much.
And what about your process? Sort of how do you work in your studio, and what kind of programs do you work with?
The software I've used over the years has obviously changed. It changes every couple of years. And it's quite funny because every couple of years when it changes again, the internet goes mad with people complaining about things changing, but that's all I've ever seen. We started out, I started out programming BASIC and things like that. And then in the early 90s, there was a HyperCard, which was an Apple product, a really amazing product. There's nothing like it to this day. And then we got into using Java, and then Flash, because for a while Flash became very powerful. And then, of course, now that mobile is around, Flash is out of favour again. And so now we're mostly doing things in Adobe Air or C++, so programming as native applications now.
So you must be sort of continually adapting to new things, and does that change what your work looks like as well? And the fact, how has it evolved with these different programs?
Well, actually, I'm always very keen not to make my work change with different software. I'm always personally, if I look at some work, either my own or by another artist, if I can work out what software it was made with before I can work out which artist made it, then I actually struggle to really have respect for the piece. I think it probably belongs more to the software package than it does to the artist. People will hate me for saying that, but it's something I live by. And I think if you do look at my work historically over the last 10, 15 years, I think most people would know that it was my work before they would be able to tell you exactly which piece of software it was made in.
So where do you think digital art is going in the future?
I suspect it's going in a lot of different directions. One that excites me is the number of new buildings in Singapore, in Shanghai, in the East, that are almost completely clad with LED screens. So every external surface is in fact an LED screen. And that brings in a great potential for having artworks and so on. I suspect that with the advent of big screen televisions, we're going to see a lot of artists just licensing their work, so you can actually pay for a feed of their work for 2 weeks, and then they'll move on and look at something else. All these potentials are made available by the internet. But I suspect what I see is that now it's possible for young people, for children, to download apps that help them get involved at a serious level with computers. And as you will know, one of the few good things that the Conservative government has done is introduced the national curriculum, computing for schools, which means that from this year onwards, all school children will learn how to program. And what that means is that there's an opportunity now for a lot more young people and children to participate in this area and find ways of expressing themselves creatively using a computer.
Just to follow on from that, I mean, even huge buildings with projection screens all around them is fantastic to see. But even on a much smaller level, things like e-ink technology will mean very soon you'll be able to have poster prints on your wall that you can literally change every day, and they'll look like posters. They won't be grainy bright computer screen type imagery. And then you can imagine that shortly after that, things like wallpaper that you can change every day. And I think, that is definitely the holy grail, is the idea that one day you'll be able to change the colour of all the furniture in your room one day. And that will be truly fantastic. And that is, that's almost here. You can already buy cushions, duvet covers, rugs and things with your own design on, and that's just one stepping stone towards that future. In terms of the work as an artist, my father really came from the generation of, in order to create digital artwork, he had to make his own computer, and he literally had to learn how a computer worked. For myself, that was a bit different. It was very much about software. We had to learn how to use these big tough computer packages to learn how to create art. We're now at the point where, with open source software, if not already, very soon, really anyone will be able to create really amazing experiences with off-the-shelf software. And more to the point, there are lots of young designers and artists who are able to program really amazing new technology, and who'll be able to work with artists or designers who don't know about computers, and create whole new experiences that we didn't, as computer heads didn't even think of. I think the computer, the possibilities of digital art will very soon be in available to everyone.
And I guess that kind of follows on to what my next question was, which is about major collections and museums actually collecting digital art, and the V&A is obviously sort of one of the forefront of that. Do you think it will be very normal soon for us to see a section in a gallery that is dedicated to digital art, and all major collections will have that in their collection as well?
Let me think about that.
Well, let me maybe jump in at this point. I think that's beginning to happen, but I think there was this argument. You asked us before, do we prefer the term computer art or digital art? There was a period where almost nobody would accept the term computer artist because it just was a kiss of death if you used that term to describe yourself. And I can remember Harold Cohen, a very good friend of mine, we're exhibiting together next month in Rio. He and I had this conversation. He was adamant that he didn't want to be known as a computer artist. He was an artist. And the fact that he used a computer was no different from using acrylic paint. You don't talk about acrylic paint artists, you don't talk about oil paint artists, you're an artist. And it seems to me that we're not quite at that stage, but I do look forward to that stage where using a computer to make art is just a natural medium that everybody recognises its potential alongside traditional media.